Well, actually, that brings us sort of nicely on to our first question in this Q&A podcast. And it's from Sanad Talmaki, who's a Chronicles Tifosi Patreon member. Hello, Sanad. And it says, hi, Nicky Mina. I have read John Foot's Calcio. Incidentally, he was my teacher at my university. And winning at all costs. Yeah, he was my lecturer. So I've read John Foot's Calcio and Winning at All Costs. What other books, blogs, or documentaries would you recommend that do a good job talking about Calcio and Serie A? I mean, we already discussed, the job of editors, but what about writers or producers? What would you recommend for them, Nikki?
Yeah, I think John Foot's Calcio is probably still the first book I'd recommend to anyone, because it's just such a thorough history of the game. It's really well put together book. John, funnily enough, I've never met John in person. He's one of those people who I've interacted with a lot in the digital world, whether by sort of tweets or occasional emails. I've never met him, but it's a wonderful.
We should do a coffee together.
Book. Yeah, oh, that'd be lovely. Did you used to chat to him about football when he was trying to teach you stuff?
No, because at that point I wanted to be part of the MI6.
Oh, right, okay.
I changed what I wanted to do in my life a lot of times, and I went to finance. So I never had any desires to go into it. Was just a passion of mine. Mm-hmm. But when I went into it, I obviously, we got in touch, and he said, I'm surprised that you remember me, because he was sort of head Italian, and I was, I didn't actually study Italian. I studied Spanish and French, and I lived in Spain. Yeah, we met up several times. We went through his book and just talked about our various experiences in Italy. And he is a wealth of knowledge. But I've always felt I don't know, when I sit in front of him, it's almost like, can I touch you? Even though he was he was our tutor, he was our lecturer, and he was, so big and important at UCL. And I don't know if he remains so at my university, my old university, but it's weird because there's a lot of people from the broadcasting or journalist world, like Raphael Honigstein, who also knows him because he was also at UCL. So it's interesting. But we should do one more together, because he knows you, talks about you a lot. So,
maybe that's a potential guest for the podcast. Well, let's talk about that later.
It could be interesting.
But there are others. Really interesting books. Friend of the podcast, Gab Marcotti, wrote a great book together with Gianluca Vialli, The Italian Job. He's done another book with Vialli more recently, which is about Vialli himself and some life lessons. One that I'm personally really fond of is Tim Parks' Season with Verona. Tim Parks is an Englishman who, I actually don't know if he still lives there. I assume he does, but certainly lived in the Veneto region of Italy for over an extended period. And he wrote a series of books, not just this one about football. He wrote books about the experience of living in Italy as an English person. And I think his insight in that is really fascinating. I know Italians who've really enjoyed reading his book as well, because when you see your culture through an outsider's eyes, you see things about it you don't see otherwise. And I think he's got a really great observational style. I think he really takes in things about people and places that are very astute. But he wrote this book, A Season with Verona, which was going on the road with Verona, as a season ticket holder, but also going to all the away games with them, going up and down the country with the ultras, with the hardcore fans, and following their ups and downs. And I think it's a really it's a biased perspective by acknowledgement, right? It's acknowledging I'm telling you this story as a fan rather than as a sort of impartial observer. But I think it's a really insightful look at Italian fan culture, and indeed, Verona, whose supporters haven't always covered themselves in glory in some ways. So I think a really fun, interesting book that I appreciated a lot. Definitely one that I would recommend. Joe McGuinness's Miracle of Castel di Sangro is also another sort of great embedded journalist book. Very different. Joe is American and has a very different relationship with football culture, soccer culture, to what Tim does. And he is, instead of being embedded as a fan, following this extraordinary season with Castel di Sangro. So he's following them through a season in Serie A B, which was an extraordinary achievement for them as a club. His relationship is less with the supporters, more with the club. And I think by his own admission in the book, he gets close to his subject to a point where he starts to believe that he's part of the subject. Like he starts getting to the point where he's trying to give advice to the manager on how to pick his team. And it gets into some very blurry, messy areas. And I don't want to spoiler it because some stuff happens at the end of the book that's a lot. And I don't want to talk about that without sort of someone who might want to read the book finding it out that way first. But it's a really interesting book. And I think probably the same for Tim's book as well. But I think certainly with Joe's book, I think it's important to keep in mind. It's always important to keep in mind. It's not just because it's Joe. It's not because it's Tim. It's just when you're getting first person accounts like that, you have to sort of bear in mind how this is being narrated. It's being narrated by someone who is an outsider stepping into a particular situation and has a particular perspective. But I think they're both really interesting books for different reasons and both really enjoyable.
Yeah, I think those are great shout outs. Another one I would add is actually, I think the first book I read, which is by Paddy Agnew, which was called Forza Italia. It's also about an Englishman. No, sorry, about an Irishman. Isn't Paddy Irish?
Yeah, he's Irish.
I was honestly like 13. Yeah, when I read this. And his experiences of covering football and Serie A at a time of real boom in Italy. And you get like anecdotes about his family, you get anecdotes about just putting money in a bank and what that makes. I remember that because it really stayed with me. Sorry, one thing you'll know in finance is we used to always, okay, this is my weird background, but coming from finance, you think of Spain and Italy as always being, countries that were never good economically when you compare them to the other giants like Germany or England or anything, the United Kingdom. But Italy was always cash rich because everyone would sort of hide their money in actual like beds under mattresses and physically hide it in the house. And it's interesting because there's a great story there about like, the banking system in Italy. And there's just all these wonderful anecdotes that I remember reading that book and I really, really enjoyed it. So definitely one that I think you have to read. I think it's important. I'm actually going to mention a blog that I think is really interesting if you like tactics, if you like specifically how certain players move within a system or not move, or just the philosophies of Maurizio Sarri or Marco Giampaolo, or I don't know if you want to read that, but you know what I mean, is ultimouomo.com. It is in Italian, but I think for me, it's one of the best things. I think it's just wonderful, absolutely, to read and understand football from a sort of a scientific point of view, if you like. Just from like stats and just tactics and the nitty gritty. Other things that I will mention is autobiographies. I've just gotten the Totti one, and Nicky does a great interview with Francesco Totti about him and about the book as well. And it's called Gladiator. It came out in Italian, but now it's available in English. You should also definitely read Andrea Pirlo's autobiography, because you will be on the floor. I mean, there were just points in that where I was in hysterics. I mean, when he talks about pranks with Gennaro Gattuso, for me, my favorite part is when I'm sorry, I do forget. But you remember there was like a striker at Milan, and I think he was Dutch, Huntelaar. Pirlo really hates him. Or at least it comes across that way. And just his snobbiness in football in general, like when somebody's tasked with sort of back in the day to just mark him and keep him out of the game, and he'd be like, is this what you came into football to do? Is this what you're happy to do, to not play, to just mark me? But I have to say, I think my favorite one includes Fatih Terim and his translator when they came to Milan and took charge, and I was in hysterics for most part. An excellent book if you just really want to have a good time. You don't even need to learn. But there is some interesting viewpoints. Mario Balotelli and what he means to Italy, what it was like to train under Antonio Conte, stuff like that. Gigi Buffon, his best friends, that wonderful relationship that he's got with various members of the Italian national team that we all know and love, and you just get a little bit of an inside knowledge on that. Otherwise, obviously, his
it's an
documentaries that I've been
extraordinarily
on.
written book. When you said on the floor, I was half expecting you to say on the toilet, because he talks about having his eureka moment about free kicks while he's on the loo. He's so funny. He's so funny. The phrases he uses, talking about warm-up exercises as, I think he called it masturbation for conditioning coaches. So he has a way of using words that will tickle me as well as Mina. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, Carlo Ancelotti has it's an interesting, because it's the same person who wrote Peerless. That's really good. Focuses a lot on food.
Yes. Preferisco la coppa. It's literally like a play on words about preferring the cup, but also coppa is a cut of meat. So yeah, I don't know what it's called in English, but that's the Italian title.
So definitely read those. In terms of documentary, you should definitely watch like All or Nothing on Amazon. Bad Sport, which goes into Calciopoli a bit. I'm on it, so I'm just going to plug that. And it's just one episode of Bad Sport that's on the Juventus on Calciopoli, but from a Juventus point of view. And there is an interview with Luciano Moggi that you should probably definitely watch, because at the time we didn't know we'd get that. So that's on Netflix. And yeah, that's pretty much us from that question. I think we've covered most of the things that they should definitely watch.
Yeah, that was. I'm sure there's more. There's always more. I mean, certainly there's always more biographies, but that's certainly a good selection to get you going.